When I knew that resilience, what does it mean to be a people of resilience, was our theme this month, I was surprised what came to mind almost instantly for me and what I knew I wanted to talk about. Because when I think of resilience, I think of failure. Not life-ending failure, even if for a time our failures may seem life-ending. I think of the kind of failure that we fully experience and live to talk about and do something about. The kind of failure that actually strengthens us, that teaches us, that shows us that we can make choices in how we inhabit our lives in this complicated world. The kind of failure that offers us a way to a tomorrow that we can face more intentionally and courageously than we may otherwise be able to do. When I think of resilience, I think of failure. I think of my own failures and how they have enriched my life. Just a few for you now. I think of stealing money off my mother's dresser as a child, using that money to buy candy, sweet nectar, how she confronted me and told me how disappointed she was, how I would need to earn back her trust. I think of how painful it was to know that I had let her down, and how I never wanted to do that again. I think of attending my 8th grade dance and awkwardly approaching a group of girls, wanting to ask one to dance with me, but not knowing how, offering a goofy joke instead, a joke that just made me look silly and insensitive. I think of how I slunk away as they looked at me with confusion and pity. How pathetic that felt. I've never told anyone that story before. Ever. I can't believe I didn't tell you the details, but it was pathetic. And I think about how this was just the first of many lessons in how not to talk to women. At least not if I wanted them to talk to me. I think of poor choices I have made in my relationships throughout my life, how I have at times been selfish or not as concerned about others' feelings or as curious about their perspectives as I could have been. I think of how I have felt as I have realized these shortcomings, either because the people told me or because I came to see their pain and disappointment on my own. I think of how I have asked for forgiveness in those times, at least some of them. How I have sought to understand my behavior so that I could continue growing into the person I most want to be. When I think of resilience, you see, I think of failure. I think of the ways that life can betray us, how people and institutions can let us down. I think of how we live through those betrayals. How sometimes we make the healthy choice of hanging in there, doing what we can to seek better relationships and organizations, and how other times we make the healthy choice of walking away, refusing to continue to be victimized by the cruelty or the bad behavior of others. And how sometimes circumstances leave us with no choices at all, it seems, other than to endure the best we can. As Langston Hughes wrote, to keep a climbing on and reaching landings and turning corners and sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light. I think of my first heartbreak, how my girlfriend left me for a guy with a cool car, how devastating that was to me then, how I had to learn to stop calling her, give her space, to accept that I wasn't her choice. I think of how bleak the world looked to me then, how limited this view of reality really was, how time and patience and tears led me to rediscover what was still possible even despite my pain. I think of when my lofty expectations for the institutions I care about have not been met, how I have expected things of others that I don't always do well myself, how I have learned that while it may feel good to grouse in a corner, it's more productive to stay at the table and to offer feedback with care and compassion, understanding that the cost of a critique is the offer of a creative solution. I think about my conscious and sometimes unconscious dismissal of others' stories before I have all the facts, about how I have been complicit in systems of oppression and privilege, quick at times to judge the behavior of others without understanding how the rights I take for granted are not accessible to everyone in the same ways they have been to me. I think about how much it has hurt to see this, how much I still have to see. And I think about how I have learned to accept the pain of finally seeing as a cost of my privilege, as a part of my responsibility to participate in the creation of more just and healthy systems. In this way, you see, my failures have become a gift to me, just as my new resilience, born in part out of my understanding of my failures, can contribute to the resilience of others. When I think of resilience, I think of failure, but not failure that arrives as resignation to the status quo, or failure that is ignored or unexamined. There's no resilience to be found there. I think of the failure that we engage and we learn from and we embrace for what it has to offer. I think of the failure that, even to our surprise, can redirect us or inspire us or reveal something essential about who we are and still can become. Without enduring and engaging our failures, we may not learn the very lessons that can help us become our best selves. Sometimes it is only by hitting bottom in our lives that we learn how to climb. In these times, the most important encouragement we receive may be the very discouragement that leaves us no other choice but to get moving, for remaining still would be too painful. When I think of resilience, I think of failure, but only a failure that has been engaged, reflected upon, used as the means by which we can pursue the future with humility and with hope, with creativity and with courage, with our minds and hearts as open as possible. So when I think about what it means to be a people of resilience, I think it means to be a people willing to fail and to learn from that failure. After reading a recent book by an economist named Tim Harford, the book's entitled Adapt: Why Success Always Starts with Failure, I'm even more inclined to think that being willing to fail is not only helpful, it is essential. I know this from my own life experience, and I think it's true in the shared life of the institutions that matter most to us. There's a word in biology for solutions that emerge from failure. Perhaps you know it. The word is evolution. Thought of as survival of the fittest, evolution perhaps is more accurately thought of as failure of the less fit. We can apply a kind of evolutionary resilience to our lives when we keep ourselves open to new approaches, learn from and weed out our failures, and copy our successes, repeating this process over and over. Evolution teaches us that just as the world does not stay static, we would not do well to stay static ourselves. Committing to an evolutionary approach of variation and selection for how we face challenges, we would expect to engage life as it is, complicated and chaotic. We would look for evidence of the success and failure of our engagement, and we would focus our attention on pursuing those modifications and works for now solutions to the problems we face, rather than once and for all answers that really probably don't exist. This kind of model, Harford says, would require that we make an uncomfortable number of mistakes and learn from them, rather than cover them up or deny that they happened, even to ourselves. This is a challenge, he says, because this is not the way we're used to getting things done. More typically, especially in organizations, we may avoid risking failure at all costs, preferring the assumed security of relying on expert opinion that something's going to work before we actually try it. But research has shown that so-called expert opinions aren't typically as trustworthy as we may assume. Harvard points to a 20-year study in which 300 people, then considered to be experts in understanding trends in politics and economics, were asked to offer forecasts of the future by answering a series of questions. So we've got 300 so-called experts. I mean, they are experts in their field, and they're asked a series of questions, and then 2 decades later, their answers were evaluated. And of course, it was seen that most of the experts had failed in their predictions. Their predictions were not without some merit. They were more accurate than the predictions offered by a control group of undergraduate students, but not by much. They were not accurate enough to warrant confidence in the ability of so-called experts to always know what to do, because the ever-changing world proves to be too complex to be predicted with confidence. We may also be inclined to look to those who are already successful elsewhere to help us determine our own directions, but that approach is not always reliable either. Harvard tells the story of how in 1982, a book was published entitled In Search of Excellence. Perhaps some of you remember that book. It profiled the business practices of 43 companies deemed excellent, using a mix of data and subjective judgment. So 43 companies that were seen as excellent, and then this book kind of described how they did things as kind of like a model for other people. Well, within just a few years, a problem arose. Almost a third of the companies described as excellent in the book as models of emulation were failing. A third of them within 2 years. What appeared to be excellent did not last. The world changed, and these companies didn't adapt. Their unwillingness to try new things and to risk failing in some small ways caused them to fail in big ways. Harvard offers 3 essential principles that could guide us toward the kind of trial and error adaptations that might lead to success, to the resilience we seek in our own lives and in the organizations we care about. The first one, he says, seek out new ideas, attempt new ways of doing things, knowing we are bound to fail. Number 2, choose approaches that we will survive even if we fail. Focus on trying small, survivable steps rather than taking big, risky leaps. And 3, seek feedback and learn from our mistakes. Establish criteria to indicate when something isn't working, and then hold ourselves accountable to adapting when our failure is evident. I really appreciate these principles because I found them to be true in my own life. And I recognize them as I reflect on my almost 14 years as the minister of this church. I know that much of the success that we have enjoyed as a congregation over that time has grown from our willingness to fail, to try new ideas, to acknowledge when they don't work. Saturday service, anyone? To keep what does, to discard what doesn't, to not be too attached to outcomes other than growth and health as we best perceive it. And these principles seem especially important to us right now, I think, as our congregation continues to adapt to a changing world. A changing world. And I don't just mean because Lori Emma Sinclair has told us she's going to be resigning in June after 11 years of service with us. That will certainly change our world around here. Research shows us that people are choosing to participate in religious communities differently than they have in the past. Regular participation was once thought of as weekly attendance, but now with competing priorities and opportunities, families may consider themselves committed members and attend only once a month. Meanwhile, the kinds of activities that people are seeking in and through religious communities seem to be changing too. People want meaningful connections, they want community within the church, and they want opportunities for spiritual growth, for learning and reflection, but they also say they want to have more opportunities to engage on behalf of their faith in the world outside of the church. Especially millennials and younger folks are more drawn to religious community for what it will enable them to do in the world than on what they do within the walls of the church. And so, seeking to adapt to these changes, our congregation hired an associate minister of social justice last fall with a primary focus of nurturing the congregation's ability to put our faith into action. When we hired Erin Gingrich, the hiring team told her we were handing her a puzzle. None of us knew for sure how to work the puzzle, or even if it was the right puzzle, but we hoped we would learn together. And now we have our first big opportunity to experiment with our new justice ministry emphasis as we approach our first Faith in Action Service Day on April 12th. Aaron and a team of lay leaders, Janine Chowdhury, Sue Huber, Jenny Malcolmson, Jean McCracken, Laura Berardi, and Steph Stenberg, have put together a long list of service opportunities for us to share that morning and afternoon. To highlight the importance of this event in the life of our church, we are not having Sunday services that morning. We're asking you to participate in a different kind of service opportunity. And there are ways that all of us can participate, and I hope that you'll reserve your preferred spot in this list of activities soon. All the information you need to register can be found on our church website. However each of us chooses to serve that day, I invite us to think about the Faith in Action event as a bold experiment, as a first step in considering together how we might further adapt our priorities as a congregation in the days to come. And I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say that on April 12th, the day of our Faith in Action opportunities, not everything's going to go very, well. There's going to be things that don't go well. Of this, I am fairly certain. Not because our intentions are not good, or because we didn't do our best planning with what we have, but because when we take risks, some failures are inevitable. So I encourage us to go with the flow, to experience that day, and the first step it represents with a positive spirit. We are choosing to put ourselves out there as a congregation to begin to learn together not only from what goes well, but from what may not. This is what dynamic organizations do. They take calculated risks, they make mistakes, they seek feedback, and they adapt as necessary. In order to see what is possible and what fits the congregation we are today and help us to evolve into the congregation we are becoming, we have to be willing to try some new things with good humor. We have to be willing to risk failing, and we have to be willing to learn from that failure. As our own lives have taught us, we will likely learn the most from where we miss the mark. What we learn will be essential as we consider our next steps as a church. What would ongoing faith and action opportunities look like for us? What new possibilities could open up? What new connections might we make that could further grow our sense of who we are and can be in this community? I'm eager to learn with you. And dare I say it, I'm eager for us to fail some too. For as Harford tells us, the process of correcting our mistakes can be more liberating than the mistakes themselves are crushing. This ability to adapt requires inner confidence that the cost of failure is a cost that we're going to be able to bear, because without it, we will never truly succeed. Won't you join me in a spirit of prayer? Life of our shared life, we have so much for which to be grateful. A crisp morning of springtime sunshine after a winter of clouds and cold. A community of fellow seekers and celebrators of life who travel with us as we do our best to live our UU principles in pursuit of a better world. The ability to create change in our own lives and to help our communities evolve toward more health, toward more justice. We have so much for which to be grateful. Loved ones who have cared for us, forebears who have led the way for us, family who, while imperfect, have made our lives possible. And let us not forget, indeed let us honor, the disappointments and failures that have enabled us to grow, to learn, to face life as it is, wretched and magnificent. To become even more resilient as we rise to face each day, each opportunity, each blessed chance to grow our spirits in community with our companions. In the days to come, may we continue to find the courage to be willing to fail, to risk reaching for the things that matter most, knowing they will sometimes escape our grasp. And may the failures we encounter bring with them wisdom worth sharing, goals worth pursuing, and a clearer vision of how we might build the common good and make our own days glad. May it be so. Amen.